Hey guys, welcome to the first episode of Freestyle Code. Now the point of this series is going to be to, around once a week, go ahead and build an application from scratch. And I'm not going to do any kind of planning. I'm not going to build it outright and then record. I'm just going to do it all in one shot, just kind of winging it. Alright, now there's a couple reasons I'm going to do this. One is because I think it's good to show your mistakes and show your debugging and how to fix issues that come along, rather than just having a tutorial that's absolutely perfect where no issues arise. Doesn't show you how to fix something if it's not working right. So that's one reason. Another reason is for time, because I do this in my spare time between projects. So it's a lot quicker to do it this way than to plan out a big application and build it and then go back and record and build it over again. So I'm just going to do it all in one shot. Hopefully you guys can bear with me. I'll try not to make too many mistakes, but yeah, so let's get started. Now what we're going to build is we're going to build an Angular 2 application that implements the Github API. Alright, with the Github API you can pretty much get anything. You can get any user profiles with their repositories, with their gists, pretty much anything. So what we're going to have is an application where we can search for GitHub users and get all their profile information along with all of their repositories with links to their repositories. Alright, I chose GitHub because their API is really easy to use and you don't have to have any kind of API key or anything like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. What we're going to do is go to angular.io, and if we click get started, it's going to take us to a page like this, and what we want to do is grab the Quickstart. Okay, so right here you can see we have a link to download the Quickstart source. I'm not going to actually download it from this page. What I want to do is get this command here so that we can clone it. Alright. Oh, and you will have to have Node.js installed. So if you don't have that, just go to nodejs.org and download it and install it. Alright, now what I'm going to do is open up a command line as administrator. And we want to go to the folder where we want to create our project folder, which in my case is going to be a folder called projects. Alright, and then what we want to do is paste that in, that git clone command, and I'm just going to change this to, let's call it, we'll just call it GitHub search, I guess. Yeah, that should do it. Alright, now if we go cd GitHub search, there we go. Alright, now for my editor, I'm using Visual Studio Code, which is a really nice, clean editor. It's free, so if you want to use that, feel free, or feel free to use, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to open folder. Let's open GitHub search. And now we have our Angular application, or Angular 2 application. So in the app folder is where all of our components are going to go, our GitHub service, things like that. If you don't know anything about Angular 2, I would suggest watching the little series I have. I think it's 9 or 10 videos explaining all the fundamentals of Angular 2. Alright, because I'm not going to do that. We're just going to kind of build the application. Now at this point we should be able to run the app. So if we go npm start, that should go ahead and, we got to run npm install first. And what that'll do, I guess I could show you the package.json file. That's going to install all of our dependencies. So if we look in our dependencies, we're using Angular 2 RC4 at this time. And it has a whole bunch of different modules, the compiler, the core, the HTTP module, all that stuff. And then down here we have system.js. That's going to allow us to load modules. We have, what else? Reflect metadata. This has to do with the Angular 2 polyfills for browser compatibility. RxJS is reactive extensions. That allows us to use things like observables and promises. What else? Bootstrap. This is not Twitter Bootstrap. This is the Angular 2 Bootstrap that's responsible for loading the core app component. All right, and then we just have a bunch of dev dependencies. We have a light server. That's what allows us to actually run the application. Typings, which is our TypeScript definitions, and of course TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript that allows us to use a couple additional features. All right, so let's go ahead and run that, Npm Install. And that'll get all that stuff set up. And you also may want to change the name of the application in this file. I'm just going to change it to GitHub Search. Okay, we'll wait for those to install. All right, good. So no issues. Now we should be able to run npm start. You can see it's starting up TypeScript and light server. All right, and it opened up in another monitor. Let me bring it over here. And there we go. There's our first Angular 2 app. So if we open up the console, we should have no errors. That's good. So we know that it's up and running and it works. All right, so we're going to want to create a component. Let's take a look in the app folder, and you can see we have all of these app.component files. Now the app.component TS, that's the TypeScript file. That's what we're going to be working in. The JS is the compiled TypeScript. Okay, so this is compiled into JavaScript, and it looks like a bunch of gibberish. All right, you want to use TypeScript with Angular 2. Okay, this looks a lot more easier to deal with than this. All right, so we have that, the main app component. We also have a main.ts file. That's where we use the bootstrap. You can see we're using that bootstrap command to initially run that app component. What we want to do is create a new component for our GitHub. All right, so let's go ahead and create a folder called components, and inside there is where we're going to have our GitHub component. So we'll say new file, github.component.ts. All right, and you'll see that automatically it compiled our JS file. Okay, but we don't want to work in that. We want to work in the TS. So let's look how the core application, the app component, is set up. All right, so we have an import of the main component package. We have this @ component. This is a decorator. This allows us to attach metadata to our component. All right, and then we have a selector inside the decorator. This is basically the HTML tag that we want to use to include our component on the page. All right, and then template is just the actual content. You can see that that's what we have here. All right, we can also link to a separate file for our template, which is what we'll be doing. And then we have our app component class. All right, so what I'm going to do is copy this and go to our GitHub component TS file, paste that in, and we're going to change a couple things. Let's change this to GitHub, and let's see, the class name we're going to change to GitHub Component. All right. Now for right now, I'm going to just change the actual template content. I'll just say GitHub for now and save it. Now before we can have it show up here, we need to do a few things. We need to go back into the app component file, and we need to import that component. So we want to say import GitHub component from, and we're going to go into the components folder / github.component. All right, so that imports it. And then what we need to do is add it as a directive. A directive is basically a custom HTML tag in Angular. All right, so right here we're going to put a comma and then say directives, which will be an array, and we just want to put in GitHub component. Okay, and then we should be able to use that, the selector that we chose, which is right here, GitHub. All right, so in here, let's go ahead and just put GitHub. Save that. And now you can see that we're getting our GitHub. This is coming from our component. Now I don't want to have this heading right here, so I'm going to get rid of this. Okay, and then if we go to our GitHub component, I don't want to just put all of our content in here because that's going to get kind of long. It's going to make the file look really messy. So what we need to do is change template to template URL. Now, in order to use a relative path, an absolute path here, we need to add another piece of metadata called module ID, and we're going to set that to module.id. Alright, and then in here, let's say github.component.html. Alright, so it's going to look for this file. So let's save that and then create that file. So in our components folder, we'll say new file, github.component.html. And then in here, let's just say, we'll put in H1, we'll say GitHub test, save that. And there we go. So now we know that it's reading it from that file. So the next thing we want to do is we want to create a service that's going to interact with the GitHub API. All right, whenever you're dealing with a third-party API, it's a good idea to put it in a service so that you can use it in multiple components. You can use it wherever you want. We don't want to just have it in this particular component. All right, even though this is the only one that we'll be working with, in the future you may want to add more. All right, so what we'll do is in our app folder, we're going to create a folder called services. And in that services folder, we're going to have a file called github.service.ts. All right, first thing we're going to do is import the Injectable package, because we want to be able to inject this as a dependency, and that's going to come from at Angular 2/core. Or actually, you know what? It's just, what is this? It's just Angular, not Angular 2. All right, and then we want to use the injectable decorator, so at Injectable. And then we'll create our class. So we want to say export class GitHub service. And let's put a constructor here. Okay. Constructor is going to run whenever we use the service. All right, so what I'm going to do is just do console.log GitHub service started. Okay, we'll save that. And now in order to use it, we have to import it into our application. So we want to go to, into our component. So in app.component.ts, we're going to go up to the top here and say import GitHub service from services/github.service. All right, now we also have to add that to our component, but not as a directive. It's a service, so we need to add it as a provider. All right, so we'll save that. Let's make sure everything is still showing up. All right, now we want to go into our GitHub component, and we also want to import it here. So I'm actually going to just copy this. Okay, and we're just going to have to whoop, that's not right. We want the component. And we're going to have to just change the path a little bit, because right now we're in the components folder. So we want to say .. to go outside of it and then into services. All right. Now, dependency injection with Angular 2 is much different than Angular 1. What we have to do is inject it in the constructor. So we want to say constructor, and we want to inject it right here. We're going to say private underscore GitHub service, and this could be called whatever you want. I like to put underscore and then a lowercase and then uppercase every other word. All right, so private GitHub service and then GitHub service. Okay, this is going to match whatever we have up here. So let's go ahead and save that, and if we reload, now you can see down in the console we get GitHub service started. So we know that the service is now connected to our component in our application. Now we're going to want to use the HTTP module because we need to fetch data from another URL from a third party. So before we use that in our service, let's go to app component.ts, and we need to import our HTTP providers. So HTTP underscore providers from at Angular /HTTP. All right, and then we need to add that to the providers array down here. Just like that. Save it, and then let's go to our service. And let's see, we're going to import it up here. Import HTTP and headers Angular /HTTP. Okay, now in order to use it, we have to inject it in the constructor. So in here, we're going to say private underscore HTTP. All right, so in our class, we're going to have a property for the username. So that's going to be private username. And for now, we're going to explicitly set it here. Later on, we'll be able to change it from within the application, but for now, I'm just going to put my own. And then let's go under our constructor and create a function called getUser. And we're going to return, we're going to use an observable, so we have to also use reactive extensions. So up here we want to import, RxJS. I think that should work. And then let's return this dot underscore HTTP, and then we want to use the get method. So in here we're going to put the URL we need, which is https api.github.com/users/ and then we want to concatenate this dot username. Okay, so that'll be whatever is right here. All right, and then we want to get rid of that, and we're going to say .map. Okay, we're going to map an observable. We want res to res.json, okay, because it's returning JSON. All right, and that's all we need for the getUser function. So let's save that, and then we're going to go into our GitHub component, and let's add a property right here called user. Set that to, actually, we'll go like that. We're not going to set it to anything. Actually, it's giving us an error. What I'm going to do is say user any, okay, saying it can be any kind of data. All right, and then what we'll do is in the constructor, we're going to say this dot underscore GitHub service dot get user. All right, and this is going to be an observable, so we want to subscribe to it. Dot subscribe. And in here, we're going to say user, and let's set that to a code block and then say this dot user equals user. All right, so it's going to assign the user property to the response from get user. For now, what I'm going to do is just do console.log this.user. All right, so let's go ahead and let that reload. Okay, so it looks like we're getting an error with the RxJS. So what I'm going to do is, instead of just importing RxJS, let's just get the map operator, because that's all we're using. So we should be able to do RxJS/add/operator/map. There we go. All right, so down here in the console, you can see that it's logging that user. So we have login, Brad Traversy, we have the ID, we have the avatar URL, and then if we go down, we have the bio, the blog link, company. All this information is now available to us. We have links for, let's see, for the HTML URL, this is the profile link. We have the gists link, followers. All this information we can now use in our application. User should now, since we did right here, this.user, we can now use that in our view, in our template. So let's go to Github Component HTML, and let's put a div, and we want to test to make sure user is available. So we're going to say *ng if user. Okay, so if there is a user, then whatever we put in here will run. So let's do an h1, that, and we should be able to say user.name. Save that, and there we go. It's pulling the name from GitHub. Now, before we go and add a bunch of more data, I want to set up Twitter Bootstrap just to make things look a little better. All right, and I'm just going to use the CDN. Okay, so we just want to grab this link, copy it, and then I'm going to go to index.html, and we're going to put that right here. We'll say link rel equals style sheet, href, and let's just paste that link in. Okay, we'll save that, and now Bootstrap is activated. All right, so let's go back to the template, and before we add anything here, I want to, the main app component, I want that to also have a template. Right now, if we look at right here, we're just including the GitHub tag here, or the GitHub directive. I want to provide a file for this as well. So let's say template URL app.component.html, and we have to add that module ID thing up here. All right, and then we'll create that file. So let's say new file, app.component.html. All right, and then in here, let's say test, and then we'll put that GitHub directive back, not BitHub. Save that, and now you can see that we're getting that test. Now what I want to do is put a nav bar up here, so I'm going to go to getbootstrap.com, getting started, and examples, and then the starter template. If we do a Control U, I'm going to grab the nav tag here, and also the container div. Copy that, come over here, and let's paste that in. Okay. Now for the nav bar, I'm going to get rid of this class here, nav bar fix top, and then I'm going to change Nav Bar inverse to Nav Bar default. That'll make it a light color. And then for the project name, let's say GitHub search. And I'm going to get rid of all the LIs. We don't need any of these. Save that. And let's go back. And okay, so that doesn't look right. And I think it's because we have a style sheet included in Angular. Down here we have styles.css. I'm going to just get rid of everything in there and save it. Alright, so now we have a normal nav bar. Okay, so let's go back to our app component HTML, and in the container we're going to use the grid system a little bit. So let's do a row class. Okay, and then in that row we're going to put a column. Let's say div class equals call md8. I want to add an offset because I only want it to be 8 columns, but I want it in the middle. So we're going to say call md offset 2, just like that. And then we'll say div, save that, and now you can see it's pushed more in the middle. Now what I want to do is create a panel in our GitHub component. So let's go to get bootstrap and go to, let's see, components, and then panels, and we want the panel with heading. So I'm going to grab this right here, copy it, and paste that here. And we're going to take the user.name right here, copy that, and then we can just get that out, and we're going to put it in the panel heading like that. Oh, wait a minute, do I have 2 here? Oh, okay, so I have 2. I want to get rid of this. No, I want to get rid of this one. Yeah, let's get rid of that. And then put that username here. Alright, let's see what that looks like. Perfect. Okay, so we have the username in the panel title. Now I want to have this split as well. I want to put the avatar over here and then some other information over here. So in the body we're going to have another row. Okay, and let's see, let's do div class, we'll say call md4. Yeah, we'll try that, 4. And then we'll do an 8 column div. Okay. Now in this column we want to have the avatar. So what we want to do is put an image tag and then source. Alright, and then for the source we're going to put in our curly braces and say user dot avatar underscore URL. That should give us the image. Alright, handsome guy. So we want to fit that to the div that it's in. So I'm going to give this a class. Let's give it a class of GitHub avatar, and also img-thumbnail. Whoop, I didn't put class in here. There we go. Alright, now on this side I want to put some info. Now I'm going to paste this in because it's kind of a lot, and I'll just go through it. Push this over a little. Alright, so first we have a bunch of labels, and what I want to do here is we want to show the number of repositories and the number of gists, followers, and following, and we can get that with these simple calls. All right, now down here we're getting some more information: the user login name, the location, the email, the blog link, and the date that the user joined. So all of this stuff comes into us from that API. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. All right, so let's just put a line break under the labels. And there we go. Now underneath here I want to have a list of the user's repositories. So we're going to need to make another call for that stuff. So let's go back to our service and let's copy the get user and then change that to get repos. And then what we want to do is just with this URL here, after the username, we want to just add on to it. We want to say /repos. Okay, and that'll get all the repositories. Save that. Let's go back to the GitHub component and let's copy this. Actually, we don't need the console log anymore. Okay, we'll copy that and then change this to get repos. Okay, I also want to add a repos up here. We'll say any. Change this to repos and change this as well. Okay, so now the repos should be available to our view. So let's go back to our GitHub component HTML, and I want another panel down here. So I'm just going to copy this one. Okay, and then we'll change the title here to, actually we'll keep the username and then we'll just do S and then repos. Okay, and then let's just get rid of everything that's in this row. So that 4-column div with the image and then this 8-column div. Okay, let's look at that so far. All right, so now we want to list all the repos. And I'm just going to paste this in and go through it. So basically what we're doing is we're using ng4 to loop through those repos. All right, and then for each one we're going to have a row. We're going to have a 9-column div that's going to have an h4 that has the repo name along with a link to that repo. And then right under it we have a paragraph with the description. Then in the 3-column row we're going to show the number of watchers and the number of forks. This is all coming in from that API. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And now you can see it's listing all of those repos. All right, and if we click on one of them, it takes us right to the GitHub page. All right. So the functionality for showing the user info is complete. What we want to do now is we want a way to be able to switch the user. All right, so we want to put an input box that'll allow us to put in a username. So let's go to the very top and above this div, and let's put a row class. Okay, we're going to have another div here, which will be a 12-column div. Okay, and let's put a form. And let's put another div here of form group. What would I do that for? It should be a div. Alright, so in here we're going to have our input. This will have a type of text. We're going to give it a class of form control, which is a bootstrap class. Let's give it a placeholder. And we'll say add username. I'll say GitHub username. And let's see, we're going to want to put an ng model here because we want to bind it. So let's put brackets and then parentheses and ng model. Okay, we're going to set that equal to username. All right, now we want an event here. When we start to type, we want to run a function. All right, so for an event, you want to use parentheses, and we'll say key up. That's the event we want, and then we'll run search. All right, let's go ahead and save it. Okay, so that looks good. Now if we open up the console and I click in and start to type, we get an error. And that's because that search function hasn't been created. So let's go back to our GitHub component TS file, and we want to go right under constructor and create a function called search. Now when we type the user, we want the service to update with the new user. Alright, so right here, let's say this dot underscore GitHub service dot update. Alright, we'll say update username. Alright, and then we're going to pass in this dot username, and we have to define that up here as well. Alright, now we're getting an error here because this doesn't exist yet. Alright, so let's save it and go to our service and say update username. Okay, that's going to take in username. Alright, so what we'll do, why is that giving us an error? It's looking for a type, so I'll just put any. Actually, no, let's do string. That should work. Alright, and all we have to do here is say this dot username equals username. Alright, so this is giving us an error. Let's just change this to any. It has to do with the typing of it. Alright, so that should work. Let's save it and then go back to the component TS. And what we want to do is these two things, get user and get repo, we want to run that when we change the username. So let's copy it and just paste it right here. Save it. And let's see if we go ahead and start to type. Okay. So it changes as we type. Okay, so whatever username, if we want to go back to mine, we can start to type Brad Traversy. Oh, spelled my own name wrong. And there we go. Alright, so if you don't want it to change like that, like as you're typing, you could go back and instead of the key up event, you could do key up dot enter. And then you can see as I type it doesn't change, but let's say I want to search for Bob and I click enter, then it changes to that user. Alright, so you can do either way. So that's basically it. I mean, now if you don't want to have a default, like when we go to the application, if you don't want to load a default profile, what you could do is in our component, let's just get rid of this in the constructor. Instead we'll just say this dot user equals false, because remember in our template we're checking for the user to be able to load that stuff. So if we save that, now we just get the input. Okay, and if I type in my username and click enter, brings us to that user. Alright, now the very last thing I want to show you is if you do a certain amount of requests in a certain amount of time, you're going to start to get an error and it's not going to work. So what you need to do is create an application in GitHub and then just add your information and then get a client ID. Alright, so really quickly I'll show you how to do that. Alright, so let's say create new GitHub app. I'm not sure the exact URL. Alright, yeah, this right here, register new OAuth. Alright, so you'll have to log into GitHub. Once you do that, let's say we want GitHub search and homepage URL. You can put anything you want here. I'm just going to put localhost 3000. Application description, we'll say GitHub search app, and then the authorization callback, we can also put localhost 3000. So click register. Oh, I guess we can't put that. Oh, we need to put HTTP. Hopefully that works. There we go. Alright, so now you can see we have a client ID and a client secret. All we need to do to implement this is to add it to the request URLs. So let's go to our service, and I guess the cleaner way to do it would be to put those as properties. So we could say client ID equals, and let's say client secret, and then we'll just grab these. Yours will be different. Okay, we'll put that there. And then all we want to do is down in these URLs, we're going to, let's see, we're going to concatenate question mark client ID equals, and then we're going to concatenate this dot client ID, and then we need the ampersand client secret equals, and then we can do this dot client secret. Oh. Alright, so then what I'll do is just copy this, and we need to add it down here, just like that. Okay, we'll save it. Invalid unexpected token. What did I do? Client ID equals this dot client ID, client secret. Oh, I have a quote right there. Get rid of that. Okay, so now there we go. Alright, so everything is working. You should now be able to make, I believe, as many calls as you want. I mean, I know that there is a cap, but it's really high. Alright, so hopefully you guys liked this video and application. I know it's kind of long. If you could subscribe or leave a like, that'd be great. I will put these files on GitHub for you to download, be able to download. And I also want to recommend an Angular 2 course that I have. It's a 10 project course, and the application is actually included in it. Not this exact application, but very, very similar. So I would suggest checking that out as well if you liked this. Alright, so that's going to be it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.